As always, if the cockpit interior is too dark, activate the flashlight with left Alt plus L. If the yellow cross cursor is not visible, press left Alt plus C to show it. Also, you can press spacebar to cut short long texts. This training mission is a continuation of our previous training lessons, where we will be performing a VOR navigation towards the Rio Gallegos Air Base, an ILS approach, straight-in landing, taxi and optional shutdown, using procedures as described on the flight manual of the real aircraft but adapted for use on the Pucara aircraft of DCS. This mission includes the following sections. Navigate to the destination airbase using VOR. Perform an ILS approach. Straight-in landing. Taxi to ramp. Optional shutdown. Communications with ATC have been omitted, as the aircraft does not yet have a radio able to communicate with the DCS AI units. The mission begins with your aircraft already in the air, at an altitude of 10,000 feet, and at 30 nautical miles from the destination, on a non-direct heading. I have paused the simulation while I explain the basics to navigate towards our destination. From the previous training mission, you already know how to set up your VOR receiver. Tune it to the Rio Gallegos VOR station frequency of 116.7 MHz. Use the highlighted double concentric knob to select the frequency value. OK. The next step is to enable the VOR navigation by setting the highlighted VOR switch to on. Good. Now on the RMI gauge, radio magnetic indicator, the double needle is active and pointing towards the VOR station of our destination airbase. The single needle is used to show our desired heading. The runway at our destination airbase has a heading of 255 degrees, so turn the highlighted knob using the mouse wheel, until it is pointing at that heading. Be aware that the knob does not allow to turn from 0 to 359 degrees, so you have to turn the mouse wheel the other way around. Press spacebar once the single needle is pointing to 255 degrees. On the adjacent ILS gauge, the small numeric window displays the distance to the VOR station, on nautical miles. The rightmost digit is decimal, thus a display of 401 means 40.1 nautical miles. OK, now that our VOR equipment is properly tuned, I have unpaused the mission. Adjust the pitch lever for a cruise speed of 250 knots, and use the trim hat to attain stable and level flight. Remember that a change in speed always requires a trim adjustment. Keep flying the current course. Cruise at 10,000 feet altitude and 250 knots indicated airspeed. We need to intercept the runway imaginary line that is represented on the RMI by the single needle. As the double needle points towards the right side, it means that the VOR is to our right, so we must intercept the runway heading needle such that its arrow is also pointing to our right. To perform the interception, you will turn the aircraft to the right until the single needle is horizontal and with its arrow pointing in the same general direction as the VOR. Begin the turn now. Pull a bit from the flight stick so that you don't lose altitude during the turn. Good. Now your aircraft is heading on a direction perpendicular to the runway centerline, represented by the single needle. Level the aircraft and keep this course. It should be around 165 degrees. You will notice that as we continue flying on this direction, the two RMI needles, the single one representing the runway heading, and the double one representing the VOR direction, will begin to approach one another. Eventually, both needles will superimpose each other. At that point our aircraft will be exactly over the runway heading line. When that happens, we will turn right again, until both needles point to the 12 o'clock position on the RMI. At that moment, our aircraft would be heading towards the VOR, flying on the runway heading, both being aligned. The two needles on the RMI gauge should be starting to superimpose each other. This means that we will soon be crossing an imaginary line that extends from the runway. Just before the needles merge, turn the aircraft right, towards the destination airbase, until both needles point to the top of the RMI, its 12 o'clock position. Good, now our aircraft is pointing towards the destination airbase. Now, concentrate on keeping the RMI needles pointing to the top of the dial. The course should be around 255 degrees. Also, maintain a shallow descent towards the airbase. At 20 nautical miles away you should be at 7,000 feet altitude, while at 10 nautical miles you should have descended until 4,000 feet. We are now at 30 nautical miles from the destination, as you can see on the ILS gauge. Begin a very shallow descent, such that you reach 7,000 feet when 20 nautical miles away, and 4,000 feet when 10 miles away. The Pucara has no radio altimeter, so all altitudes are barometric and the destination airbase is at an altitude of 1,050 feet ASL. You are now at 25 nautical miles from the destination airbase. We should be within range of the instrument landing system station on our destination airbase. We have paused the mission once again, so that you can tune the Rio Gallegos ILS frequency. Set the navigation radio to 110.3 MHz. Press spacebar once the ILS station has been tuned. The destination runway has a heading of 255 degrees, and from our VOR navigation we have it already set on the HSI. Press spacebar to unpause and continue the mission. We are now at 20 nautical miles from the VOR station. Press F10 to check the map for other air traffic that there may be nearby, as we can't rely on the ATC. Press F1 to return to the cockpit after the check. The ILS station on the ground emits two beams, the localizer, providing lateral guidance, and the glide slope, providing vertical guidance. Our ILS instrument has two bars. The vertical one represents the horizontal position of the localizer beam. If the vertical bar is to the left of center, turn the aircraft towards the left. If the vertical bar is to the right of center, then turn towards the right. When the vertical bar is centered, your aircraft is just over the localizer beam. The horizontal bar represents the vertical position of the glide slope beam. If the horizontal bar is above the center, it means that you are under the beam and should reduce your descent rate. If the bar is under the center, it means that you are over the beam and should increase your descent rate. In other words, you should chase both bars, by turning left or right and by increasing or reducing your descent rate. When both bars are centered, you are then on proper course towards the runway. Begin reducing speed by pulling the propeller pitch lever back to reduce power. As the speed reduces, you will need to retrim the aircraft. Activate the landing lights with a right click on the highlighted switch. You are now at 10 nautical miles from the VOR station. The Pucara doesn't have speed brakes, so once you reach 150 knots, extend the landing gear and its drag will help you reduce speed. You are now at 5 nautical miles from the VOR station. At 140 knots, extend the flaps. This will further reduce speed. Retrim the aircraft to keep level attitude. The increased drag of the flaps will force you to add power with the propeller pitch lever. Try to keep a speed of 120 knots through the remainder of the descent. We are at finals now. Reduce speed to 115 knots and use pitch trim to keep the nose level. Just before touchdown, reduce the speed further, to 100 knots, and lift the nose a bit to touch down on the main gear and not the nose wheel. Touchdown. Use the rudder to keep the aircraft aligned with the runway. Wait until the nose wheel comes down, before applying wheel brakes. Reduce speed and take the first available exit from the runway, on the left side. This is Street B, proceed forward and then take a turn to the left, towards the parking ramp. Turn on the taxi lights, and then turn off the landing lights, by clicking on the highlighted switches. Next, retract the flaps, by clicking the highlighted lever. You are now at the ramp. Park at any spot within the left side of the ramp, but park the aircraft with a U-turn, so that it ends up on a perpendicular heading to the airport terminal. Good, you have parked your aircraft. The aircraft shutdown is optional, select. Press spacebar, if you wanted to practice the shutdown procedure. Press backspace, to end the training now. Congratulations, you have managed to navigate towards a VOR station, perform an ILS approach, land, and taxi the Pucara. You have successfully finished this mission. On the next training mission we will begin the weapons training. Press spacebar to exit the mission.